welcome everybody. We are so glad to have you with us for this installment of the Liturgy Forecast Catholic Schools edition. Today we're going to be talking about all things liturgy for Catholic schools, both Mass, prayer services, other ways to bring prayer, especially liturgical prayer, into your classrooms. And specifically, we're going to be looking at this date through the end of October, so about Q1 or so within Catholic schools. As a result, as you might have guessed, we'll have other conversations and other webinars looking at Q2, November, Advent, Christmas season, Q3, Q4, et cetera, throughout the rest of the calendar year. So hopefully you find this conversation useful and know that we'll have other conversations to help equip you for the rest of the liturgical year in the coming weeks. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves in just a minute, but I want to offer a couple of housekeeping details. I am posting into the chat a link that will take you to the page on the Center for Learning website, where eventually this recorded archived video will be posted. So we are recording this session, and you can go back to watch it again or share it with others. It should be posted in the next couple of days. Also, in the description for this video is where you will find a link to download the PDF handout. I will also be sharing my screen as we work our way through the conversation. So if you're joining us from your phone or from a computer where you have, like most teachers this time of year, multiple windows open, you don't need to worry about opening the handout just now. I'll be sharing it to guide us through. You can go back and download this later. Again, this handout is free. You're able to use it and its contents as you see fit. So you can find that out there. If you have questions at any point during the conversation, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And if we don't get to your questions today, we will try to answer them in an upcoming newsletter or blog article or reach out to you directly. Again, as we're working our way through this, we are recording this. I know many of you are joining and you might think, boy, I wish my principal or classroom teachers or pastor or music director or music teacher would have heard this. Please feel free to share the link with them. Also, this is a Catholic schools version of the Liturgy Forecast. We also have a parish version of the Liturgy Forecast going through the entire liturgical year. I'll say more about that in a little while before we close. But if you would like to join us, if you're also responsible for planning liturgy for your parish community, the Liturgy Forecast kicks off with our first installment looking at the seasons of Advent and Christmas on Tuesday, August 29th, so in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that program, I'll share more about how you can join us for that. I think those are all the practical details. Again, the link to the chat is in, or the link to the handout is in the chat, so you can access that. I think we're ready to get started. Any practical details that I've forgotten, Glenn or Holly? Perfect. Well, with that, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Reichert, and I am happy to be the director of the Center for Learning at OCP, and I'm really glad to have all of you here with us today. I will be facilitating today's conversation, looking at liturgy in Catholic schools, especially for this first quarter or until the end of October or so. Joining me are two panelists who love liturgy and Catholic schools so much. One is joining on her vacation, and one is joining really in the final minutes before the shuttle picks him up for the airport before his vacation. So thanks to both of you for being here. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Holly, why don't you kick us off?
My name's Holly Smith. I am the Director of Liturgy and Music at St. Margaret Mary in Louisville, Kentucky. It is one of the largest parishes in Louisville. There I help facilitate the entire music program for the parish and liturgies. And I work with the school music teacher for school liturgies and the children's formation coordinator who prepares school liturgies. So I am a vessel to help them prepare meaningful liturgies for our community.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Thanks for being with us. Some of you might remember Holly was with us along with two other colleagues way back in January. I think we did a webinar on Lent in Catholic schools, and you can check that out on our website as well. And last but not least, Glenn, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Glenn Byer. I am Canadian by birth, so hello to any Canadians joining us today. I am the president of the North American Academy of Liturgy. I'm part-time supply organist and cantor at St. Anthony's Parish here in Portland, Oregon, and I also work for Oregon Catholic Press. I was the worship publications manager. And I also teach part-time at the University of Portland. No wonder I'm tired. I need a vacation.
That's exactly.
So I've been doing music in church since I was 16, and I've been a trained liturgist since the mid-'80s.
Great. Well, thanks to you both again for being here. And again, welcome to all of our participants joining us live and to anyone who's watching this video after the fact. We're glad that you're here. Thank you for bringing your questions, and let's get things kicked off. So again, for those of you joining us live, in the chat is the link to the handout. I'm going to share my screen so that those of you who aren't able to access the handout, or if you're watching the video recording, you can see what I am referring to. I want to do just a quick orientation to our handout. So as we're referring to different topics or different elements, you can find this rather quickly at hand. So in our handout, after you scroll past this lovely cover, a little description about who we are at the Center for Learning and what we do. Some of our roadmap for today is really going to work through these 11 recommendations and other topics that we as the panel have thought it would be helpful to talk about. There's a space here for you to add your own recommendations or your own notes. So we're going to be working through these 11 as well as some other practical considerations. There's a few resources, essential resources and helpful links that are here. We'll also be mentioning by name, and we'll try to capture in the chat as much as we can other links or titles or resources that you might want to reference or make sure that you have at hand for this quarter or into future quarters. We also have a liturgical calendar for the quarter. So starting from yesterday, all the way through the end of October, these are the primary celebrations for each day of the week until the end of October. And each one of these are hyperlinked. Will take you to the lectionary readings for each of these days and celebrations. We'll say more about that. We also have a list of other days of prayer or observances as acknowledged or recognized by the USCCB. So you have a sense of what else might be coming up, other things that you might want to bring into your parishes or your parish schools' observances or celebrations. We have a couple of things here looking ahead. So knowing that teachers are planners, right? And you have to get this calendar out to your families and reserve time on parish calendars. These are some other dates that we'll be talking about in our next webinar that fall in Q2. So in November, in Advent, in the Christmas season, that might be helpful for you to look at now. We'll say more about that in a little bit, but that's a little bit of looking ahead. Then later in the guide, we have all kinds of templates for Mass or prayer service planning sheets, a sample script for a prayer service. We have 2 sample templates you can feel free to adapt, handouts to help students prepare for the role of lector or role of cantor. We have all kinds of descriptions or resources for things that come up on Sundays that you might incorporate during the week. So a lot of resources, a lot of materials that we might not necessarily reference today, but we hope you'll keep this PDF at hand to go back to it as you're working to plan your prayer and your liturgies throughout the calendar year. So that being said, let's kick things off. You know, we want to strike a balance in this conversation between not assuming that all of us have the same type of liturgical knowledge, but also not being too remedial, right? So we're going to work our way through. If we're talking about something that seems painfully obvious, maybe use that as an opportunity to jot down how we're talking about things or explaining things to help you resource others. And at the same time, if we blow past something or using a language or referring to something and you just don't know what that is, please feel free to flag us and ask so we don't make any sort of assumption about prior knowledge. Glenn, in the spirit of this, making sure we have our bases covered, could you give us maybe just a general understanding? You know, we're talking about weekday masses here as we're talking about school masses. Could you just give us a real quick snapshot? What do we need to know in general about weekday masses or the types of liturgies we'll be celebrating in schools as opposed to what we celebrate on Sundays?
Sure. The weekdays, in some ways, are an extension of the Sunday celebration, really, especially in ordinary time, where even the antiphons, the first text that's actually in the missal, is used throughout the week, unless a saint interrupts it. So that notion of the weekday mass is not trying to have the same oomph necessarily as a Sunday celebration, while at the same time there is a base level of solemnity that any Eucharist needs to have. So there's sort of a balance between the two, and especially depending on who's there. If you may have in an all school mass, you may have more people in the church than are at many of the masses on the weekend. So it's a big deal in that sense. So you really need to balance that. There are different levels of festivity. There's different ways in which things unfold, and different requirements depending on what level of feast you're dealing with. But basically, for me anyway, the weekday celebration is gives you the opportunity to delve more deeply into what was celebrated the previous Sunday, and in fact to prepare for the Sunday that's coming. So either way that can work, and that applies just to Eucharistic liturgy, but to prayer services, Bible studies, anything like that. It's a way of, in fact, not working so hard. We over at the company, we always like to talk about we're preparing the liturgy, because it's already planned, and that's part of what that's a benefit you as educators can use. There's already stuff out there. There's already stuff planned. Pull it in, make use of it, instead of trying to recreate the wheel every time. Because if I have to create a prayer service every week, I'm not there. It's too much work. It's a lot. And so to use stuff that is already there, I think makes a big difference. Does that help? Is that
Yeah,
kind of
no,
where you
that's
wanted
great.
to
That's
start?
great, Glenn. Thanks. And certainly as we look at this quarter, we'll see that we thankfully, at least as we're kicking off the school year, the first several months of the school year fall solidly within the same liturgical season. We're solidly in ordinary time and the second part of ordinary time. Holly, could you, not to put you on the spot, but knowing that you're in a large parish with a large, very active parish school, one of the things that I appreciate so much about, one of the many things I appreciate about your ministry and the way that you do what you do is you do such a good job, at least from what I observe, with liturgical formation and catechesis for the students in your parish and in your school. So to put you on the spot, if one of the students in your children's choir or in your school asks you, what the heck is ordinary time? How do you explain what ordinary time is to one of the students in your parish?
When I get asked that question, I like to think of green for growth because it is the time of the year where we should be working as disciples of Christ and continuing to build our formation. And how are we serving to build the church and the kingdom? That's my simple explanation of it. And that's how we remember green, because grass is green and it grows.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. That's great. And obviously, referencing the primary liturgical color for this season. I remember as a kid seeing, ordinary time and everything and thinking that ordinary meant like boring. Like this is just, there's nothing special about this particular time. And of course, we know that that's not particularly true. This is ordinary time in the sense that it is ordered in a particular way. And to your point about growth, those of you who have been able to look at the handout, or if you're watching this recording and looking at the handout, even looking at what we've provided, the overview and the summaries for the Sunday Gospels during this time, from the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time through the 30th, when you see the parables and the familiar stories and things that we're seeing, really emphasizes those points of instruction for growth as we celebrate this particular season. So I love that image of green and growth and plants. That's fantastic. Let's kick things off with our first recommendation. So those of you who are joining us, whether you're a classroom teacher, you're a parish music director, you're an administrator, in some schools you might be all three of those things. As you're thinking about planning liturgies, one of the first recommendations we have for you is that the Ordo is your best friend. Use it. Glenn, what the heck is an Ordo? Holly is showing us one, but Glenn, what the heck is an Ordo?
So the liturgy is designed for people who, maybe we're not have very good attention to detail. We're creative people. The Ordo gives you the information that you need to take the liturgical books and to put them all in the right order with the right pages showing, and to do the right things at the celebrations that are on offer. Some days there's only one celebration that's possible, and this is what you do. Other days there's a lot of opportunity for some creativity. Either there's an optional, what they call an optional memorial, so you can do it or not do it, or there might be several. Or if it's an ordinary day, you can do something else altogether. You can do what they call a votive mass or a mass for a special need. So the Ordo is basically the playbook. It tells you, here's where you put the ribbons in the book.
Yeah, and I'm going to share my screen for everyone. Now, this is not our handout, but this is the free PDF you can get for the liturgical year from the USCCB website, and there's a link in our handout to find it. This is what this particular Ordo looks like for this week. So today is the 14th of August. It is Monday. Today we are celebrating the memorial of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, priest and martyr. It tells us that the vestment colors today are going to be red, and then also has the citation for the first reading and the gospel along with the lection number. So the Ordo, in this Ordo, it's giving us a simple information. Some Ordos provide a lot more information than this. But the Ordo is your best friend. It tells you exactly what's happening here. So if I'm in charge of school mass on, I'm going to scroll real quick to the month of September. On Wednesday, the 6th of September, I can take a look and see what the readings are that my class is going to need to worry about. I can look and see if we're celebrating something in particular that day. It's a weekday of ordinary time on the 6th. The liturgical color for that day is going to be green. I can find in the lectionary, the lection number 433, to find these texts, and I know what I'm working with. Right. Holly, you showed your Ordo. What, as you're planning school liturgies and things, like this might sound like an odd question, right? But how do you use the Ordo along with your planning? Are you looking far in advance? Are you plotting out like a month at a time? What's your general routine for planning these school liturgies?
Well, I'm a super planner, for lack of a better word. So all of our school liturgies are already drafted on the calendar. We already know the titles of all of the school liturgies. So we may be preparing them seasonally or as classes are, but we have the whole schedule for the school year already done and prepared. And we use the Ordo to do that. However, the Ordo goes from the beginning of Advent to the end of ordinary time after Christ the King, depending how that falls. So the Ordo isn't out yet for for 2024, but luckily we know how dates fall, or the USCCB Ordo is out there. Maybe not my little diocesan Ordo for that, but it's a way that you can see. As you maybe identify the school liturgies, you can see what else is going around the other liturgies. So our diocesan Ordo makes suggestions for blessings around specific feast days. It also provides a brief summary. Sometimes you might read the reading and go, what can I pull out of that reading for a first grader? Some of our daily reading texts aren't super kid friendly, or maybe not as applicable, but the summaries that they provide are always a sentence to relay all of the readings. And that gives myself and my team a starting point for what is the theme of the liturgy in the Ordo.
Yeah, and so I showed on my screen before the liturgical year calendar from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, right, which really looks at the universal liturgical calendar, adds some unique things for the United States, but every diocese, or if you're in a school that's sponsored by a religious order, every religious order or congregation has a particular expression of their Ordo, because there might be something unique to that diocese or religious congregation. So Glenn, do you want to say something about our particular local Ordos and how that might differ from diocese to diocese?
Sure. I lived in St. Louis for many years, and on the calendar, St. Louis, I think, is an optional memorial. Well, in the Cathedral of St. Louis, it's a solemnity. In the diocese, it's a feast. So any parish in the diocese, what comes from the USCCB ultimately comes from Rome as a universal calendar. Then it gets specific for the United States because there's feasts in the United States that are celebrated on different days. In fact, there can be differences between countries. Cattery, Tekakwitha, is in April, I think, in Canada, and in July here in the States. But then it goes down to the next level, to the diocesan level, where there will be particular saints that will have an importance either for the diocese or, as you said, for the religious order. And so there will be changes that will be made to that. But even down to the parish level, if your parish is named for Saint Cunegunda, then Saint Cunegunda is a solemnity. Or if you know the date of the dedication of the church, of the parish church, that's a solemnity. And so whatever was there, the seminary chapel where I worked at in St. Louis, we dedicated on the feast of St. Augustine. And so we never celebrated Augustine after that. We kind of wiped him off the map because that was the anniversary of the chapel dedication. So there's a lot of variety that you can, the Ordo is your guide, but you need to apply it to your particular situation.
Yeah. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I am going back to the handout. So those of you who have been able to find the link and are looking at the handout, as you look at what we provided for you here, now please hear this disclaimer. This is not a replacement for your diocesan ordo, but at least it's a calendar to be able to look ahead and anticipate what might be coming. So as you see, a couple of points of information that I want to make sure to emphasize, whether you're familiar with them or not, or if you're in a position of liturgical leadership, you can make sure that the teachers in your school or other ministers know. Our Sunday lectionary, right, is ordered on a 3-year cycle. Our weekday lectionary is ordered on a 2-year cycle. So we are in year A of the Sunday lectionary until the end of this liturgical year, so till the end of November. We are in cycle 1 of the weekday lectionary. So if you are in an office and you have all of the lectionary volumes, you're looking for cycle 1 for weekdays, you're looking for year A for Sundays. You'll also notice as this calendar is ordered that you're going to see different types of celebrations. And again, some of us might be familiar with this, some of us might not be. You'll notice we've got solemnities. You'll notice that we have feasts. You'll notice that we have memorials, and then you'll notice that we have weekdays in ordinary time. Glenn, can you give us just a real quick, like, what's your someone stops you in the elevator and you have like 15 words or less to explain the difference between a solemnity or feast or memorial, just so we make sure we're all level setting those terms?
There's first the level before memorial. There is a whole book of saints that aren't on the calendar. Just because they're not on the universal calendar doesn't mean they're important and can be important for your school or for particular students in your school. You often run into this when you're preparing for confirmation, people looking for obscure saints. So there's the ones that aren't on the calendar. Then there are ones, often they're newer or they are not they have universal appeal but are not of sufficient moment. And so those are optional memorials. You can do them, not do them. But that again will vary from place to place. Andre Bessette is an optional memorial in the States, and it's an obligatory memorial in Canada because he's Canadian. So saints that are locally important have higher importance. Those are celebrated basically like weekday masses. There's no Gloria, there's no creed, there's one reading before the gospel. It's the simpler form of the mass that we find during the weekdays. Things that are feasts are of greater moment. Some of them have 2 readings assigned to them, some of them only 1, but very often they'll require a Gloria or, and so they're treated with greater moment. These are saints of greater importance. All of the apostles are considered either feasts or solemnities. All of the, some of the more important scriptural saints, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, those kind of people, or people who really have done something that is just so unique in the life of the church that they're considered that important. Other things that show up in feasts are things in honor of the Blessed Virgin, and also there are feasts of the life of Christ, basically. And so you go up from there, and like exaltation of the cross, that's considered a feast level. So it's a bigger deal. And then finally, it's what's called progressive solemnity. You get to the big kahuna, and that is those are the solemnities. That doesn't, and the solemnities are really things of universal significance. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary comes to mind. And so that's how the rankings work. What's interesting is that it has nothing to do with whether or not a saint was martyred. You'll notice that there are red memorials and red feasts, white memorials and white feasts. So the color of the vestment has to do with whether or not the saint was martyred, or if it has to do with the suffering and the death of Christ or the descent of the Holy Spirit. It doesn't have to do with what level on the ranking those feasts fall. That wasn't 15 words.
Yeah, no, that was good. But you could have done that depending on what floor we were going to in my elevator scenario. I asked this question, and I think it's important to pause on this topic for two reasons. One of them is for your own particular planning, to know some of the different requirements depending on the type of celebration. If you have a school mass tomorrow for the Solemnity of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, you will have an extra reading from Scripture. We will sing or recite the Gloria together. There will be the Creed because it's a solemnity, right? Also, I mentioned that for all of you who are doing calendar planning, so principals, pastors, etc., that as you look at the calendar, depending on where your school masses typically fall, you might need to do some adjusting depending on where liturgical celebrations fall. So I'm going to move to page 4 in your handout. If you look ahead, the 1st of November, which falls on a Wednesday this year, is the Solemnity of All Saints. So if your school typically celebrates school mass on Monday, so you'll have school mass on Monday the 30th, what that means, or what the requirement suggestion would be, is that either we now move that school mass to Wednesday, or we keep our school mass on Monday and also have mass on Wednesday to celebrate that solemnity, especially because that solemnity is also a holy day of obligation. Holly, how does your school schedule school masses? Do you do all school masses, individual grade levels throughout the week?
We do a mix of both. We have our all school masses on Thursdays, but all of the other grades go to mass another time within a 2-week rotation. So they're going and attending a daily mass without music, and a school mass where we do have the music to kind of elevate the liturgy with the school. When there is a holy day within the week, especially a solemnity, St. Joseph, All Saints, Ash Wednesday, it's always moved. The all school mass is moved to that day of the week.
Sure. Yeah, and which I think is common practice in a lot of places. And so for those of you who are in charge of calendar planning, please make sure to keep November 1st and December 8th on your calendar, because those are both solemnities and days that would make sense for you to have your all school celebration. So before I stop sharing my screen, one final thing, our next point or recommendation is to plan with a seasonal mindset. And so again, we're in ordinary time. We have this idea of growth. We're at the beginning of the school year. So we have all kinds of opportunities at Mass or prayer services as a whole school in our classrooms to mark new beginnings or growth in the school year. Holly, as you have planned out the school liturgies for the month of September, or looking at this quarter, how do you plan with a seasonal mindset? How are you looking at the totality of the calendar as you're planning those all school liturgies, making music choices, etc.?
Well, we're working really hard to bridge the gap between the school and the parish, which I highly recommend at all times, if possible. And so I work a lot with the music teacher when we introduce music, we're both on board for it. Like, is this a song that we can sing for the parish liturgies and also for the school liturgies? And when we introduce music, we are intentional. We don't sing it necessarily 8 weeks in a row, but we know that we've committed to introducing a song, and it's going to be used on the weekends and for school liturgies throughout the introductory period in particular. And a lot of times, what I love that our music teacher does is she looks at what our weekend music is, either before or after, and if those songs fit the theme of the school liturgy, which they often do because the readings extend and lead up towards, it's not all the exact same music, but some of the music may still be the same between the weekend and that school mass. So the kids either hear it before school mass or after, like depending on the order of that.
Yeah.
For when it comes to music. Does that answer that question? I
Yeah,
think
no, that's
lost-
great. And Glenn, I mean, similar question to you, as you, uh, as we're thinking about, this idea of planning seasonally, or really, being able to have some sort of consistent elements or common elements that are helpful not only to mark a season, but, again, we're going to get to the question of how do you get kids to sing? How do you introduce new music? That type of repetition can be helpful. Do you have any recommendations or way to think through how someone might look at September or October and plan that music or other celebrations seasonally?
Um, oh, Glenn, sorry.
No, go ahead, doc. Go ahead,
No, go
doctor.
ahead.
No, doctor, really, go ahead.
Just in my own little world over here thinking about apologize for that. Um, Glenn, I'm gonna let you speak.
All right. So, yeah, the notion of when they built the lectionary, they were building it in mind with seasons in mind. And so the Sunday lections, because they go on the ABC cycle, they are in the Gospels, at least, are in scriptural order. So just highlighting what the Gospels are will give you a really good sense of what this season is about. And there are different seasons. Towards the end of ordinary time, when we get to November, there's very much the season of the end of the world. It's a little bit scary, in fact. Where we are now, this is still Jesus doing his ministry, his life in ministry. It's very much that kind of feel to it. And that's a great place to start a school year, because Jesus is really working on the teaching aspect, some miracles, but basically it's really trying to form the people. So you start with the Gospels, but keep in mind that for Sundays, the Gospels are chosen first, and then the Old Testament reading supports the Gospel, and the Psalm supports both of them theoretically. So those are really important to hang together. When it comes to the weekday readings, it's a different story. The weekday readings, again, the Gospels are in sequential order, but the first readings, by and large, they're their own world. They're also going into there. It's an attempt, and this is important to keep in mind. One of the chief aims of the reform of the liturgy was that the scriptures be opened up more broadly, that people would read more of the Bible. And so this really gives you an option, because the Gospels will be going through, basically chapter by chapter through a book. And then the first reading on its own world will be going through books, both Old Testament and New Testament, depending on the season of the year. It's also important to remember that it's only during ordinary time that really there is this two-year cycle. When you're in Advent and Lent, the readings stay the same from year to year. And this is really good when you're a teacher, because then you don't have to be recreating the wheel during Advent. It's only during ordinary time where the first reading will change. The Gospels will stay the same pretty much throughout the year. So, that way, as you're building something, realize that you're building for the long term. And if you've used it this year, you can build on it for the next year. But I'm also a huge fan of having seasonal music, having things that work for an entire season. This particularly applies to the responsorial psalm at school masses, because there are, I think, 6 responsorial psalms that are assigned for ordinary time, period. You can use them anytime during ordinary time. And that can be a great way of you ask how to get the kids to sing, how to get anybody to sing. There's a couple of pieces to it. And one of them is, as you said, Holly, is this business of repetition, of keeping things in, just keeping it liturgical, but at the same time, using repetition to make things become more familiar so they can sing along more easily. And just one side point, when I do music workshops, we always talk about this. Musicians get tired of a song much more quickly than the people do. Yeah. And so you may think, oh, we did this last week. No, that's not. It's a different piece. If you listen to Top 40 radio, how many times in a given day do you hear the same song, let alone over the course of a week or several weeks? So certainly we can do that, a little bit of that in the liturgy too, without any problem.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And I know, Holly, you have something to add, but I want to spike the ball on, what you mentioned about if you as a musician are getting tired of something, that means others are probably just learning it or internalizing it, but also within a school context. And now, especially like in an elementary school level, I think I have four children all in elementary school. My daughter Grace, who's 6, who's going to be in 1st grade, has not had 40 years of singing a particular hymn, right? So, I mean, even as we're thinking about the songs that we might think everybody knows, or we're tired of this, or we want something that's new, we're in a unique position, I think, especially within Catholic schools, to be able to teach that treasury of hymns and songs and chants and other things to a whole generation that hasn't had the decades of getting sick of something yet, or getting tired of that particular song, because many things are really new for students of this particular age.
I forget who I was talking to about this, but even the use of Latin, because, kids knowing a secret language that their parents don't know, that's cool, or can be.
Yeah.
And, to start, to again, take the long view, maybe they just learn the Kyrie in the first couple of grades, and then maybe they'll learn the Agnus Dei, and then maybe the Holy. By the time they've graduated from your school, maybe they got a basic mass setting, so they can go anywhere in the world and not feel quite so left out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Holly, your thoughts about seasonal, and then I want to talk to you more about the Sunday connection also.
I highly recommend using seasonal psalms, because the psalms, if you're having music for your school liturgies, the psalm should be sung then. If you're not having music for your school liturgies, then the psalm can be spoken. But if you're gonna you have music in other areas, I feel strongly that the psalm should be sung. And a lot of the psalms that we read or hear in the lectionary on weekdays, there's not always accessible music for them. I mean, one could make an argument there are if we want to chant them and use psalm tones. I'm not going to dive into that. Rather than the benefits of having a seasonal psalm, even you can have different cantors because they're confidently learning a song and leading others in prayer confidently through something that's familiar and not having to stress about learning it. The students will recognize the refrain and participate and sing back without having to be distracted by the words or missing a beat. So seasonal psalms across all the seasons for school liturgies can be your friend.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And if you look at, and I believe it's later in the handout, there's the recommendation in planning prayer services, and it has the listing of many of the common psalms for the season of ordinary time. Psalms like Psalm 19, Psalm 27, Psalm 34, Psalm 63, many of which have, settings accessible, and multiple settings, familiar settings in your parish hymnal or missalette. I want to go back to one of the things that you were mentioning before, Holly, which I think is just brilliant, and I wish more of our parishes would do this, and that is the connection between what we sing on Sunday, right? The Sunday repertoire, Sunday approach to liturgy, and what we're doing within school liturgies. Can you say more about, or go back to and add to what you've already described in terms of the relationship between school liturgies and Sunday liturgies within your community?
Yes. So again, like I said, we work together. Our mass setting for our parish is the same for our school. We do change seasonally. So some people think that's crazy for school because Advent's so short oftentimes. But it's a priority for our parish, and the music teacher takes the time to teach it to our students. And because it's different, they look forward to it each year. So all of the mass acclamations stay the same. The only difference would be in the Alleluia. For on the weekend, we sing the prescribed gospel acclamation verse for the weekend. We have just one for the school liturgies, rather than changing it each week for the gospel acclamation verse. But we stay with the same memorial acclamation. And like I said, it's the same musical mass setting for the seasons. The Psalms are usually versions of the Psalms that we do on the weekend. They come from that collection. The music teacher doesn't use something completely different. That way they're tied. And like I mentioned before, when we introduce music, we're a very diverse parish. Many of our parishes are, but we're intentional about bilingual or trilingual music. And so when we pick these songs, I'm introducing them on the weekends throughout this time, but she's also going to be introducing them to the school at the beginning of the school year. and throughout the school season. So we've picked out a selection of new music to add to our repertoire, but we still have our collection of standards, general hymns that are appropriate to use both on the weekends and for school liturgies, depending on the theme of the readings or whatever that is tied to.
Yeah, I'm going to be coy for a second. Why bother all of this type of coordination between Sunday liturgies and school liturgies as opposed to letting each of them just sort of be their own thing?
It just seems like the right thing to do. But the response we've gotten since we've done it is incredible. Like when I have parents come up to me after the weekend mass, like, that song we sang for communion today, my kid comes home every week from school singing that song. And they just sang their little hearts out during Sunday mass. And the parents are like, I didn't know you could sing. Or the kids, you know, they recognize something and then they tell their parents that they recognize it. We have a large school, our kids sing, and when the kids recognize something and they sing it, then they want to go to mass. So they're bringing their parents to mass. Yeah. It's just, there haven't been any negative consequences to doing it this way. And they're not separate. We are one parish school community, not two separate ones. We don't need to be singing all new music for the school and old hymns for the parish. We have the diversity of the various styles of music. And that ties back into, I don't like to make chant penitential, that's a whole nother argument, but we do chant the Roman Mass propers, or the Roman Missal chants during Lent, and the kids love it. We have to teach it to them, but they're learning the Kyrie in Greek, and they think it's the coolest thing, and the Holy in Latin, and they're like, Mom, did you know that Kyrie eleison is Greek? Like, I can speak Greek now. They just feel so special. Like, if you tell them it's hard and crazy, right, they might think it is, but if you present it to them in a way that is fun or unique, then they just gobble it up. Our kids love to pretend that they're monks and chanting. You just hear them walking down the hallway, and so then we're also teaching about vocations and right, praying for vocations in our school. That's a possibility, and that's the history of our church and our faith. So we tie it all in with that.
Just two quick points on that. One, when I first landed in Italy as a student, it was a kind of a culture shock. And, you know, you go to church on Sunday. So I went, and to have something that I could latch onto because I had been trained in some of those mass parts and I knew them I was able to join in, and suddenly I felt a little more at home. I do wonder, though, about people who live in places that are not as ideal as where Holly is, where the parish and the school are sometimes at loggerheads. This is a common problem I hear about anyway, at least so I've been told. And really, I think if you are having challenges in working with the parish, there's nothing to prevent you from attend Mass on Sunday, emulate what they've done, even with, you know, with or without their permission. It doesn't, you know, or if, as you said, Holly, they're using old school hymns and you want to do something a little different, many of those old school hymns do have contemporary arrangements. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is saying, Holy God, we praise thy name, 4-square hymn before 4 time, there's a wonderful setting of it that is very much, it's got a beat and you can dance to it, you know? So I think you can, even if there is conflict between parish and school, you can work as educators to try and to be the bigger person in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, for me and our, I'm blessed to be in a parish where both the parish and the school, you know, make great attempts, just like yours does, Holly. Knowing that for many of the students within our Catholic school, and I think this is becoming more common, certainly in other places, they and their families aren't coming to Mass in our parish on the weekend. Doesn't mean they're not going to Mass, but they might not be in our parish as people are more mobile or traveling, and anything that can be done to both, and this is, I believe, point number 9 on the recommendation list, right? Anything that can be done to help form and catechize liturgically students. The Kyrie eleison is Greek. why is it that we sing in Greek, right? The more that we can unlock this treasury in an intentional way of the chants in the month of October, the month of the Rosary, maybe that's when we learn the Ave Maria chant, right? And we sing Ave Maria in Latin. But also anything we can do to lower the barriers to entry for students and families to feel like they know what's happening on Sunday, that when I go into that church on Wednesday morning, I feel like I know what's happening. I sing, I participate. It's like a whole different world when I'm there on Sunday. What can we do to help encourage and make more accessible and available that type of full liturgical participation on the weekend? And it comes from familiarity, and it comes from knowing the same mass parts. I imagine, Holly, that students in your school, I love the example of the parent who identified that the kid is just singing the heck out of this particular song because they know it. But how beautiful if that would also be they're singing the heck out of the mass acclamations because we're singing the same mass responses instead of something that's completely different. The other thing I think is it doesn't sell short, right? Both the sensibilities or the abilities of the students within our schools. Can they sing things that have drums and shakers? Sure. Can they sing hymns? Absolutely. Can they sing chant? Definitely. And so we have to make good pastoral choices, obviously, but we also should be careful about being too limiting in what we might be assuming or we might be projecting. Let's get to some of the questions and things that I know have come through the chat. There was a question, Glenn, and I know you typed an answer to the chat, but I want to make sure it's also vocalized here. Talking about the lectionary for children. Can you give us a quick what it is and when you might or might not be able to use it, and maybe some of its limitations?
Sure, it's a couple of decades old now, and it was done before the most recent renovation of the Roman Missal. And when we went from sacramentary to Roman Missal, the Eucharistic prayers for children were left out, were not included in the Roman Missal. That doesn't mean that they aren't, and so people ask questions right away. Well, what about the children's lectionary? Can you use it? Sure. It was approved. It has the imprimatur of the Holy See. That's fine. It was never pulled specifically, and so if it's not prohibited, it's permitted. And so it has. It simplifies some of the readings. It selects verses. It uses a different translation, all of which makes it more accessible, especially to younger children. I find as children get older, the more we can expose them to the text that they're going to hear in the big church, the better. But there are times when these celebrations are more useful. Yeah. So that's my 2 seconds on the children's lectionary.
And I think what you describe is great, and from what I recall in the children's liturgy, children's lectionary, also it might not have every single celebration in it. I think for ordinary time it has many, but not all of them. So you can't necessarily just use it, right? Some of the best teachers I've seen in Catholic schools who use this connection might begin, if the children's lectionary readings exist, talking to their class, whether they're in charge of Mass or not, maybe beginning with the simplified version to eventually look at and utilize the actual lectionary. I know Sister Francis, when I was in 2nd grade, I remember she would use sometimes the differences between the children's lectionary and the actual proper lectionary for some of our vocabulary exercises. So I mean, you don't have to go that far. You don't have to pull the Sister Francis necessarily, but even to use it as a stepping stone, but to ultimately get us to the lectionary readings in the language that we're going to accompany as adults, but also on Sundays, I think is also a strong recommendation. Holly, do you use the children's lectionary at all within your school liturgies, or how do you use it as a tool?
Rarely for school liturgies. Yeah. Again, we're pretty mindful about if it's needed and available in there, and it's just a children's translation of the prescribed reading of the day. But most of the time we stick with the daily, like the updated lectionary.
Yeah. This is also a bit of a digression, but since we're talking about the lectionary and again, connection to Sunday and really building up and forming students for participation in the liturgical life of their parish, we've been talking a lot about Eucharistic liturgies and about school masses. All of these recommendations and principles we can also utilize and apply for classroom or all school prayer services as well. And so using the Ordo or thinking seasonally, connecting to Sundays, I think is great. Obviously, you have to make a good decision and a pastoral decision in terms of whatever it is you're planning. I always like to recommend, and also in practice, that if I'm planning a prayer service or I'm using something from scripture, I try to use the lectionary version of that particular reading, if nothing else, just to make that connection. So in this prayer, if we're praying about, or praying over the parable of the sower and the seed, that it's the same language or same format or structure when students hear it eventually in the lectionary cycle and can make that connection. Again, we can make all kinds of pastoral judgments, and it might not make sense to do that, but going to the lectionary as the source for the scripture readings we're using in our classrooms or in prayer services, in another way, in a different way, makes that same Sunday connection and can help with that own formation and breaking down walls for students as they're looking at liturgical life of the full parish. Let's talk about repetition, right? Because one of the things, as we mentioned it twice now, thinking seasonally might mean repeating something. Maybe it's use of a common psalm, which is available to us, or might be available to you depending on local requirements or requests. Holly, as you plan your school liturgies, or as the folks in your school are looking at school liturgies over a month or so, you already mentioned, with mass acclamations, how you use them throughout a season. What other types of things might you repeat or might be common from week to week throughout ordinary time for the benefit of your students?
Little things that we do, if we're introducing a song that's new, a lot of times we'll put that during the preparation of gifts. But if it's like a Eucharistic hymn, it's appropriate there. But we'll do it when it's brand new during the preparation of gifts, but then we'll move it to communion the next week to sing it during communion. You can even take it a further step if your community uses preludes. We usually start as preludes, then it moves to the gifts, and then to communion, because we want people actively participating all the time, but especially at communion. If they can't sing the refrain after a time or two through the song, then in my opinion, it's too hard of a song to be using right away. Glenn, did you have?
Well, I just wanted to, I'm the liturgist. I wanted to jump in on the communion piece.
Yeah.
What we sing at communion needs to be something that easily can be participated in, hopefully not having to hold the book in front of your face as you're going up in procession. So to have something with a good solid refrain that people can jump right in on, that's really good. And also to remember that introduce the music in the parish is exactly the same way. But remember that the way the book is written, the way the Roman Missal is written, that song, you have actually a lot more time for it than you think you do, because it's to begin as Father receives communion. That makes it complicated in terms of how you go to communion, and that's important too. But the idea is to have that kind of, you can basically get a refrain and a first verse in before Father even comes down off the altar. So it gives you indeed more time for people to really bring those songs into their hearts so they can sing as they're going in procession, and to understand that their singing is supporting the communion of everybody else who's going to communion. That's why we're singing.
Yeah, no, I think those are great recommendations. And I think, Glenn, what you mentioned, especially about communion, emphasizes that, when in choosing our music, and also to make singing as accessible as possible to the students or any adults, because remember, what works for children oftentimes just works for people, right, of any age, is that, consider what is it that's happening at this point in the liturgy, and how is the music I'm choosing accessible to be participated in or not. So to your point, something that's a simple repeated refrain, something that's familiar, means that I have a higher chance of singing it with full heart and voice as I'm participating in the communion procession than if it's something that's a 10 stanza hymn that's new to me, right? So certainly that type of pastoral sensitivity makes sense. In parishes that I've either observed or worked in, I think, we try, especially at the beginning of the school year, not only to look at repertoire that's common to the parish, so there's something that's familiar, and trying to have a balance of new things and familiar melodies, but we might choose the same communion hymn for a couple weeks in a row, or we might choose the same hymn of sending for the same, for all of September to kick off the school year. Again, there's nothing wrong with repeating. So maybe as we look at a month from week to week, maybe 2 or even 3 of the pieces might be repeated next week and something changes, but over time we're changing or moving through, especially for elementary schools with students who are younger, who might be learning this. They might not be able to read, but they might know by repetition the words and the melodies. I think it's really important. Glenn?
I just wanted to jump in on that. At the beginning of the school year, there's a tradition of having the Mass of the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is supposed to enliven everything that we do at school, whether it's the sports, the math classes, the Holy Spirit is making all of that possible, all that work. So for a school to have a Holy Spirit song that they would sing at the beginning of the school year and then use it throughout the year at any number of different occasions, I think that's sort of a theme song. To have a Holy Spirit theme song, I think would be really useful throughout the year, and it helps the kids to sing more.
Right.
That Holy Spirit song can also be the song that's used for your students who may be preparing for the sacrament of confirmation throughout their whole preparation journey, and also used at their confirmation liturgy. There's many ways to tie that in, and to catechize the Holy Spirit just in general in our lives.
The Roman Rite's famous for not being very high on the Holy Spirit. We need to fix that.
Yeah. I want to take this pause for those of you who are joining us live, again, as a reminder that you can continue to add comments into the chat or into the Q&A feature. We've got about 15 more minutes or so. I know we reserved a little more time for this topic just because we knew there was a lot to get into. So please make sure to add your questions or your comments there. Let's stick with this idea of, again, repetition, planning seasonally, especially through the lens of how carefully chosen music. How is it we can help students sing, right? Getting kids to sing is always seems to be difficult, or maybe the reasons for the difficulty shifts, right? So I know that's been a question that several of our participants joining us live have raised. We've already talked about, again, lowering the bar to entry with something that's familiar, something that's accessible, something that's repeated, something that's rehearsed. I know in many schools, they might take an opportunity, after Mass is over, especially if school Mass is happening at the same time as, the parish Mass, that parishioners leave and the school might stay and we might rehearse a song, right? Or there might be another time when we're able to sing that particular music. So we have some of these things already. Holly, what other recommendations would you make for not just introducing music to students, but also in such a way where they respond by singing and participating?
I think encouraging a culture of participation. So, your pastor, not all of our priests can sing very well. But I always make sure everybody knows God gave us each our voice. And he said, like in the Psalms, it says, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. It doesn't say an in tune and perfect voice. One of my primary pastor, he does fine, but he says he can't sing. But he uses the gift he's been given and he models. He may not have his microphone on, but he is participating. So making sure that modeling is present, that they're encouraging and inviting the assembly to sing and participate. And it's okay to practice outside of the church. We don't ask our students to get up there and read without practicing the readings. It shouldn't be just the cantor or the choir to practice the music. We all should participate. So we have little playlists of recordings. It's 2023, and there's recordings of all of these songs out there. And if there's not, you can make one. I make recordings all the time if we change something, but the students hear them maybe while they're journaling or doing a prayer time in the classroom. So they can just be on in the background, or they're intentionally practicing it. And familiarity is great, but it's also to introduce something with excitement, they'll learn it really quickly. When the Feast Meant for Everyone was brand new, we had decided we wanted to learn it, and we talked about it, and the kids fell in love with it. And now whenever that song's programmed in our church, 750 little students are just singing, "Oh, how great is the love of God," because they practiced it. Yeah. They understand what it means to participate. I think just having the conversation, and sometimes in the church isn't the best place to do that, because the church is unfamiliar sometimes to a lot of people. So, or it may just feel weird to practice in there, or their friends are really close to around them. The eighth graders are like, everybody's watching me, I'm not going to sing. Approach them in a place where they are comfortable and encourage them to, when we practice, it's not always perfect. That's why we practice.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be good until you practice. So in the classroom, it's okay to make mistakes.
One of the things that all of what you mentioned is so helpful. And one thing I really want to emphasize is oftentimes the adults in a school or in a parish who are most bothered by the absence of kids singing are also themselves not singing. And so modeling that type of singing, are your classroom teachers singing? Are the parishioners who are there singing? So, I mean, this really has to be a full court press. I think, to the pastor point, my recently former pastor also was not a great singer, but he would sing, or it was clear to the students he was participating, and he never missed an opportunity to express gratitude and appreciation for how well students sang. It wasn't empty lip service. It wasn't, a quiet church and he said, you guys sound great. But when they did sing something, he recognized it, and kids felt really great about it. So I think that's helpful. The other thing I want to mention is when I was a worship director for our area of parishes, I put together a Spotify playlist. You can do this with a YouTube playlist as well, to your point, Holly, about the recordings that exist. I'm not sure about all of the other publishers, but I know for that OCP, we don't publish a song without there being a recording available to you. So I put together for the month of September or for the next quarter, here's a playlist of all the songs that I know we're going to be singing. And I gave it to classroom teachers. I also sent it home for parents, because parents are always looking for something to listen to in the car instead of talk radio. And for classroom teachers to put on while you're doing an art project or it's quiet time or whatever. It was a great helpful resource, but also it got those melodies in the ears of the students and it paid dividends. So some of those things might also be helpful as resources, and might get some of this into, it gets liturgy out of the box, right? It doesn't just mean we think about liturgy or liturgical year at Mass. We can also pray this way in our classrooms, in our cars, etc., which is also helpful.
One fun thing that I'll just share that our students love, and then the parents love it even, the adults love it even more. For communion, because we want the kids singing, we really encourage that. We always get out of the way on the final refrain. It's almost always ends a cappella in our church. And everybody just feels the Holy Spirit in that moment. And they don't stop singing. They actually sing louder when you just let whatever your primary instrument just kind of get out of the way and let everybody sing in praise, prayer, and thanksgiving to God. And it's something they all look forward to, and just encourages them to sing even more.
This is another thing that, again, whether it's useful to anybody or not, I found great success with our two schools in our parishes. The way that school masses were covered is that, this week is third grade's, turn. Next week it's fourth grade's turn. And so the students from that particular grade, to the extent they're able, to cover many of the liturgical ministries. And the practice had been that the grades have their assigned place where they sit. And any of the students who wished to sing came and sang, and the other students sat where they were. And I changed it so that the entire fourth grade class came and sat as a class and were the choir for that particular grade. And what it meant was you couldn't opt out. You weren't soloing necessarily, but it got all of the students familiar with sitting in that space, from leading in that particular way. It elevated the whole class, etc. But it didn't give the opportunity to opt out in terms of being a leader of song, or at least standing and modeling singing. So sometimes it's even a simple proximity issue that might make some of this available. Glenn, please.
I want to talk just a little more broadly about singing in general. Outside of, it strikes me as odd that we expect people to come into church, whether it's adults, school children, doesn't matter. We expect them to come into church and to do something that they don't do in the rest of their lives. When do people sing together? Maybe they sing happy birthday. Maybe they sing that, not even the national anthem at ball games anymore. It's performed by somebody. I still sing it. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm Canadian, and I'll still sing the American national anthem at baseball games because it's my right. But to have this, to engender in the school this notion that singing is just part of life. It's what we do for all kinds of things, not just at Mass and not just for the liturgy. And, I mean, you see all these talent shows, everybody thinks they can sing. I mean, you see them and you say, well, maybe not so much. But, on the television, there's all these talent shows, The Voice and American, all of that. People want to be creative. They want to express themselves that way. They need the outlets to do it, certainly during the liturgy, but not just during the liturgy.
Yeah. In the 10 minutes or so that we have left, two final things that I want to make sure we talk about, at least briefly, one of which has some resources in your handout, and that is, don't miss an opportunity to help inform and catechize, right? So again, remember, especially in elementary school or even any grade level, right, that as we're helping students prepare for liturgy, prepare our liturgies, to be able to explain this is what we do here, because I think is a great opportunity. Also, don't miss an opportunity to involve students in service, students who can lecture, or students who can act as ministers of hospitality, students who can act as music ministers. We have two. Feel free to adapt them, not use them to inspire writing your own. Two preparation guides, one for student lectors, one for student music ministers, that can help. It's a resource for you to give to a student, or to modify to give to a student, to work through with students, to prepare for that type of service, to have them participate not just as members of the assembly, but also as leaders of liturgy. And eventually, if we can start to then help model and incorporate them into participating as leaders within our parish liturgies, etc., we can not only use their particular gifts or talents, but we can again further connect and break down the barriers between school experience and Sunday experience.
And there's a responsibility on the parish side to be supporting their pastoral musicians and to develop new ones coming up. A lot of parishes are just so busy just trying to stay afloat, but they have to remember that there needs to be some investment on the part of the parish. If you've got a pipe organ in your church and you're not supporting people to become pipe organists, it's going to gather dust. That's what's going to happen, So I think there's that again, the two-way street between the parish and the school is very, very important.
And also, I think for all of us on this call, all of us joining live, all of us watching later, think about your own ministry vocation story. Like, if you're a music director or liturgist, when did that begin for you? And I'm willing to bet for 98% of us, it began probably at a pretty young age, but it began by somebody making space for us, right? Somebody identifying our ability to contribute or add, and then making space, right? And we owe that, right, to our own students. Nothing breaks my heart more than hearing from a place, we have this student who really wants to be a minister of hospitality, but on Sunday it's the same ushers who are always scheduled, so we don't need anybody, so they never include him, right? We need to be able to make space. That makes sense. We need to still have things covered and prepare responsibly, but make space. Last big thing before we kind of do our wrap up, let's talk about, don't forget the saints. And we have all these optional memorials. We have memorials. We have feasts. We have all this incredible richness, especially as Catholics. Holly, I again, from following you on social media, I know saints occupy a really important place in your life and your heart and your spirituality as well. So let's talk about this. Don't forget the saints. What kind of best practices, suggestions, recommendations would you leave for Catholic school teachers about this cloud of witnesses we have in the saints?
Well, there's countless resources and countless saints out there. And one, I feel like we can use all the prayers we can get. So we should be asking for their intercession regularly. I've had a lot of students not understand what it means to communion with the saints. So taking that opportunity to just catechize about the saints. We have so many opportunities for the saints to be present in our liturgies with the optional memorials or the prescribed memorials. That's between you and your pastor for that. You can't just say we're doing this liturgy. I don't think we said that before. Make sure your priest is on board with your liturgical title for the day if there are options, because he may or may not be. But we use the saints for our school prayers, our morning prayer, our closing prayer. There's gajillions of books out there or websites where you can just learn about saints. So I don't know. I just think it's such a, I know I'll never learn it all. So it's a big part of my life. I try to read something from a saint every day.
Yeah.
And we are all called to be saints. And that's something we really try to press in our students. Like we are all striving for sainthood. So how do we look up to these men and women who have gone before us in our faith? And, you know, they lived humble lives. They didn't all perform huge, great things. How does that inspire us to live our saintly lives on this earth? So,
and I think, and Glenn, I know you have something to add, but Holly, I can't remember the name of the book, but I feel like it's one that I've seen you post about before. One of my favorite books about lives of saints, I don't remember the title, is divided by, you know, saints who struggled, or saints who overcame setbacks, or saints who, you know, faced failure, or saints who they're and I'll think of it, and those of you joining live, I'll put this in our follow-up email. There are all kinds of ways to also help our students by talking about the models that we have. Sometimes saints seem like they just were perfect and immaculate from birth, right? And oftentimes it's not the case. We have all kinds of other role models. Yes, that's it. Pray for us. 75 saints who sinned, suffered, and struggled on their way to holiness is a fantastic resource within classrooms. Glenn, you
and
want
there's one for
Go ahead.
younger children too. Some of these might be a little intense for elementary, but we use this book for our middle school students, especially those preparing for confirmation. But there are other children's appropriate ones that really talk about.
Yeah, great.
And it doesn't all have to, and you know, the prayers are really important, very valuable. At the same time, there's a lot of stuff that comes along with the saints, a lot of fun stuff. You know, we all know about the blessing of animals on the feast of St. Francis, but that's not the only one. There's in September on the birth of Mary, there's the blessing of seeds for the following spring. You can do all kinds of different things. September 12th is the name of Mary. What a great day to celebrate the kids' names, not just Mary's name, but all the, you know, use the, again, it's trying to lighten the load of the educators. You're working so hard. What are things you can just pull in that are ready-made, that are already there? The Feast of St. Joseph in March, there's the tradition of the St. Joseph altar, the St. Joseph breads. There's a lot of food involved in there as well. I don't know how much of that you can incorporate, but you can at least send recipes home, you know, to say this is how you can celebrate Saint Joseph, or this is how you can celebrate any number of the saints.
Yeah.
That was one. There was something else, and I forget it. So it must have been a lot.
Well, and I think too, you know, celebrating. I love the example of September 12th, but even just you've got the roster of students who are in your class looking at name days, right, and being able to celebrate name days in a different way, not related to saints necessarily, maybe presupposing sainthood, but thinking about celebrating baptism, right? My kids' parish school does a great job of, in September, at one of our school masses, we celebrate and remember the anniversary of baptism for all the students who were baptized in the month of September, which I think is lovely. This is a great way to have students look something up, right? Next month, we're going to be looking at the feast of Saint Josephine Bakhita. Somebody's going to look up and tell us about Josephine. Or in art, I think of at Sacred Liturgy Ministries, Anne McGuire has written prayers with these lovely cards and images of saints. And of course, you can find all kinds of artwork that depicts saints, but much of it is allegorical, right? So we have this picture of Saint Boniface, and he's standing next to a stump, and he has a book with a sword in it. Well, someone figure out why is it that he's represented this particular way, right? The artwork of Mickey McGrath does a great job of modernizing some of this. There's Hildegard von Bingen at her desk with her quill, and she's writing on an iPad that's plugged into an Apple block on the wall, right? So there's all kinds of ways that bring sainthood and things into perspective that we can bring into other parts of our curriculum as well. Final point and final wrap up. Again, we could be here for the next quarter talking about this quarter. I want to mention that our next conversation that will look at quarter two, specifically November. So All Saints, All Souls, period of remembrance, Thanksgiving, change of liturgical year, season of Advent, and then the end of the season of Christmas, right after, the new year, depending on when your school comes back. We will have that conversation. It hasn't been posted yet, but on September 25th. So we'll send more information about how you can register for that conversation, and how you can get access to it, and the other resources and things we'll put together, especially looking at Advent practices, Advent wreaths, etc. Lots of things that we'll cover there, especially things with saints, days of remembrance, especially of our faithful departed for November. So there's a lot of richness there, so you won't want to miss that. That's coming up again September 25th, and you'll get more information. The 11th point on our list is do your best and ask for help. Don't forget, every Catholic school in the country has liturgies, prayer services, masses, etc. So please reach out to your colleagues. Ask your music minister or liturgist or pastor in your parish, or someone at a neighboring parish or at your home parish. Ask folks in your diocese. Ask folks like the Center for Learning, right? On the back of your handout, you'll see some of the other services that we provide, and especially ministry coaching and some other things that we do. We have all kinds of organizations and publishers and not-for-profits and institutes who are here to provide ideas and thought leadership and partnership to be able to help you do this better. You are on the front lines of catechesis and formation for these students, and we are all so grateful for all of the work that you're doing as classroom teachers and administrators and pastors and DREs and every other type of ministry. And so whatever we can do, and speaking on my behalf and on behalf of everybody else in similar roles, please don't hesitate to reach out to ask, because it's in the church's best interest and in the mission of the church's best interest that you have what you need in order to be successful, so that we're all successful. And then just a couple of words of thanks. Again, Holly, on your vacation, Glenn, who is sitting next to his suitcase, ticket in hand, about to go on vacation. Thank you both for journeying with us through these topics and sharing your own wisdom and your own encouragement. We really appreciate it and have benefited greatly. So thank you. Thanks to all of you who are here live for taking the time. Again, this is being recorded and will be posted along with a handout. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks to all of you who are watching after the fact, taking the time to look at this webinar. Again, we're here to help however we might be of service. Right before we came onto this webinar, I was listening to our local public radio station, and they had a conversation about how teachers are fleeing the business. Right? A third of teachers leave within the first 4 years of their service, right? The average tenure of a school principal is less than 2 years. So all that is to say, thank you all who are in the field of education. We benefit greatly. We know it's not easy, and we are grateful for and inspired by your witness and the ministry that you provide. We really hope that you'll join us for another webinar. Again, please let us know how we can be of use. Go to learnwithocp.org/calendar to see our other conversations that are coming up, and new ones like the one on the 25th that aren't posted yet. And I hope that we'll see you at another conversation sometime soon. Again, Glenn, Holly, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your vacation, and we'll talk to you all soon. God bless. Bye-bye.